Today we're making flaky biscuits. Now this recipe might seem very standard and simple, and it is, but you have to make sure that you follow the foundational parts of the recipe and understanding that it is cut-in method, and cut-in method means that you need cold ingredients, so cold butter and cold buttermilk. Let's get started. We have our dry ingredients here, and I'm going to go ahead and get these sifted, and I put the buttermilk and the butter in this photo, but I went ahead and put it right back in the refrigerator so that it would stay cold, and when I need it I will bring it out. Excellent. So I have my dry ingredients here in my tummy, and I have sifted them. The only thing is that the kosher salt, because it's a large flake, it just stays there. And so you want to put that back in, okay? Now I have brought my cold butter out of the refrigerator, and I went ahead and made sure that it was very small cubes already. And now I'm going to do cut-in method. You'll see in the recipes this week that we'll do a lot of different types of recipes, but they are all the same method, which is cut-in method. And that just means that you're cutting in the fat into the dry ingredients. So we are utilizing butter in this recipe for flavor as well as texture and color. So maybe you have seen recipes for biscuits where it is shortening. Maybe you've seen recipes that are vegan that have coconut oil. So just understand that if you substitute those things, that you'll have some different results in flavor and color and texture. So I sped up the video here to let you know that this cut-in process takes a while. Now at home, if you have a pastry cutter or you have 2 forks, you can definitely do the same thing. And what you see is I'm looking for pea-sized pieces of the butter. Okay, now you understand why it's super important to get everything cold. Awesome, so now we're adding the buttermilk. I'm gonna add all the buttermilk right now. And the recipe that I have here is scaled just so that you have enough buttermilk, and possibly you need a tiny bit more. And so I didn't want to have a recipe where you always have too much buttermilk and you're just kind of sitting on it in the measuring cup. So as you see here, I'm very gently folding the dough as I had put the buttermilk in. And I've noticed that I have some dry pockets of flour at the bottom. So I'm just adding a few tablespoons of buttermilk here. And then you'll see that I'm folding it gently and that I notice it's a little bit dry still, so I have a total of about 3 tablespoons of buttermilk that I've added to the mixture, okay? Now if you want to make a note of that for yourself when you're actually doing your midterm, then that would be a great thing to know ahead of time. So now I put the dough onto my parchment paper, and I like to do that so that I can just bring the dough together easily without really messing up my work surface. Now if you don't have big parchment paper like this, that's fine. Go ahead and use your counter, no problem. And just be careful not to overwork this dough. Now the thing about biscuit dough is that you just need to be very gentle with it. Okay, you don't want to be squishing it too much or kneading it. Kneading is bad because you will end up with a really tough biscuit at the end. Okay, so I'm going to actually show you towards the end that I will take a leftover piece and I will knead it, and then you'll see how it turns out in the end once it's baked. It's a totally different product. Okay, so if you see here, I'm patting the dough and I'm shaping it so that I can start laminating. So the process of laminating is basically giving it a couple of different folds onto itself. And what that's going to do is that's going to increase the amount of kind of butter pockets that you have in the dough. And the butter pockets are fat pockets. And once the fat pockets bake in the biscuit, they create the flakiness. So the more of those layers that you have, the more flakiness you will have in your end product. Okay, so if you see, I did 1, 2, 3, 4 folds total. So I'm just patting it and making sure that it's a rough rectangle, and I have flipped it over and put it onto a floured surface, and now I'm using my rolling pin, and I'm not rolling yet. You see, I'm just very lightly pressing the dough out, okay? If you go ahead and start rolling right away, then it activates the gluten in your dough and also makes it more tough. Okay, so I'm just pressing it out, and I will roll it just a smidge, but you want to do the pressing motion for most of it. And the finished thickness is about 3/4 of an inch in thickness. Now, if you want, you can get a ruler if you want to do that, but I kind of do it by eye because I'm used to it. Great. So now that we are done rolling it out, I'm showing you some different tools that you can use to cut your biscuits. So I like to use a rolling cutter here. Some people call this a pizza cutter, but I also showed the bench scraper. So the important thing to remember is that you have to trim your dough. Oh, by the way, you can also use a knife for this, making sure that you flour it though, so it doesn't stick. And the reason why we trim the dough is we make sure that we create open edges so that you have even rising in the oven. So if you don't do the trimming of this dough, then once you get to your corner pieces in the oven, you'll only have maybe 1 or 2 sides that rise, and then the other part will just stay unrisen, which is not what you want. We want to have even, consistent rising in our biscuit dough. So what I'm doing now is I'm just roughly marking to see where I'm going to actually cut my dough so that I get even pieces. And this also helps because then you can see how many pieces total you will make. And in your midterm, you will present 8 of your best biscuits. Okay, so you want to make at least 8, and well, it's always better to make more than 8 or more than what you need, and that way you can kind of filter through and choose the best ones. Okay, so you see here that every time I slice, I am flouring the rolling cutter. Okay, and then I will go ahead and mark on the opposite side, and I'm pulling in the dough here as well to make sure that I'm not making it kind of uneven when it's being cut. So now I'm showing you here the little pockets and layers of fat that you've created with your lamination. So that was all of the folding that we did. Now what about these excess pieces? Okay, so you bring them together very lightly. You don't want to knead it again. You don't want to overwork the dough. And I'm just going to trim the edges one more time, and I'll create 2 more biscuits from this. Okay, they are not going to be as consistent and nice because it's like pretty much scraps of dough, but they'll still be really delicious, and you can use them as tasters. So I have 2 more biscuits here that I'm using, but what about this trim? Okay, I want to show you what not to do when you're making your biscuit dough. So a lot of students, they start kneading the dough. You see how I'm pressing the dough out with a lot of force. And so what's happening here is I'm actually melting the butter pockets that I've just created, and I'm overworking the gluten in the dough, in the flour, excuse me. And so this creates a bready texture. It's no longer going to be flaky, and even though it'll still be edible, it's a completely different product in the end of what I originally intended to make. Okay, so again, I want nice flaky biscuits with distinct layers and pockets. Now, how do we get really nice pockets? We chill our dough for at least 10 minutes in the fridge or 5 minutes in the freezer. Please do not skip this step of chilling. It's extremely important, and you'll notice that when you bake them that the butter will not seep out of the biscuit dough, but if you go ahead and skip this step, you'll notice otherwise. So I'm baking it at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm rotating the pans halfway through, which was about 8 minutes. And here's my finished biscuits. You see that they're deep golden brown, and here's my one that I overworked at the end. You see that it has a nice color, but the flakiness is not there at all, and it really feels like a hockey puck, okay? So look at my finished biscuits, okay? Deep golden brown on the top and the bottom. You can see the layers, distinct layers. And once I kind of open it, you can see as well that there's the air pockets from the butter, and I also do not have any raw dough. So when you're picking up your finished biscuit, please make sure that it feels light, because if it's heavy, that means you still have raw dough.